You're listening to the Overfunctioning Podcast Chat Sessions, connecting leadership concepts and local leaders.
Well, welcome, friends, to another chat session with me, Alex McMahon. And today I'm here with Jerry Craig. And I am super excited to talk to him because he is the executive director of the County of Summit Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services, and he's been doing that for 9 years. And he is going to have a plethora of knowledge that I am going to glean from as much as possible and learn from just in all of his years when it comes to social services. And so he actually has a background, a master's in social work from Case Western Reserve. He a bachelor's in social work from Akron, grew up in Talmadge, which, as a green person, irritates me a little bit. But hey, it's no big deal. He actually lives in Brimfield now. And prior to his being an executive director at the county ADM board, he was a manager of clinical services. And for 20 years, he worked with mental health services for serious mental illness. But more importantly than all of those things, Jerry's going to be prideful with his family, and he's been married for 35 years. He has 2 grandkids and 1 foster granddaughter, which he loves just as much as his other grandchildren. And so, like I said, here with Jerry Craig, and Jerry, the question that I'm going to have posed to you is very broad, but one that I think is important for people to kind of think about, and that is, what is leadership? So I'm going to toss that to you, and we'll see where it goes.
Okay. Well, thank you, Alex, for inviting me to be a part of your program here. And asking somebody what is leadership to them is really a broad question and could go in a lot of different directions. But for me, I think that leadership is really about how you approach whatever you do. It's not about being the boss. It's not about being at the front of the line or look at everybody see me. It's really about showing the qualities that you want to see in everybody else and demonstrating that through your daily work. It's about doing things that you expect of other people, and that nothing is too small or too large that you shouldn't be able to take it on. I can remember early on in my career where I'd sort of been thrust out front by some of my coworkers, and sometimes I would wonder about why that was. And I think to a large degree it was because I was always someone who looked nonplussed by challenges and difficulties. And sometimes that's all it takes is, if you can fake it, a lot of times you can get through, some of the barriers that you face every day. Okay.
So, oh man, I have so many questions already. Let's start with this. You said showing qualities and how you approach and setting those expectations and all of those things. How did you get to that point to be able to do that? How do you do those things?
How do I show the qualities? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it has to do with just my nature. My nature has always been, and maybe life has shown me this a little bit. I think that oftentimes when I've been Mr. Big Pants, try to be a big shot, that's backfired horribly. And so I think life sort of keeps you humble. But again, I'm an introvert for the most part. And so it's important for me to kind of keep my nose down and work hard. And I would much rather be behind someone else supporting them than to be thrust out in front and, look at me and, and approach it from the standpoint of, I don't necessarily have to be the face. I think it's oftentimes in your best interest, depending what your role is, to be out front, but that's not anything that I ever aspired to.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about being behind the scenes, and I just interviewed somebody the other day, and she was also introverted and would rather be behind the scenes. But we both know that leadership isn't merely about just being out front. And so The one that I don't know what this. Did you say nonplussed? Is that the word that you used?
Yes, yeah.
What what is nonplussed?
It's well, a good example of that would be, I was riding in a car with a coworker at one time, and there was this huge bang, and my coworker jumped, and I just sat there kind of calmly, and it didn't really affect me. And she was surprised that I could be so cool under those kinds of circumstances. And inside, it startled me, but I didn't show it on the outside. And I think that's really what it is. It's appearing to be unaffected by things that happen around you, and I think that gives people a sense of, oh, this guy is calm, he's under control, and he's not going to allow just anything to throw him off the path of where he's going.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we talked about this already. That a big part of leadership is being resilient to these changes that may come up front, and so saying, maybe I don't need to be as reactive to every situation I've ever been in. So thinking through, okay, this thing banged over here, it's okay. And I'm going to check it out, and I'm thinking through it, and maybe inside I'm like, oh, what the heck's going on? But saying, what is the proper response to whatever's happening to me? And so this coming up with a proper response, how did you get to that point? And you said that, and I have a feeling that this is probably something that has been maybe innate in you for a while, that you've been calm, as seen as a calmer person. Is this true?
Yeah, I think that's probably my nature. I'm a reserved person. Being an introvert, I don't particularly enjoy attention.
Yeah.
I think I'd rather be unnoticed. So I think that's part of it, and part of it too has to do with the fact that not always the most confident person. And that has forced me, especially in a leadership role where I have to make important decisions, not to jump to conclusions about things and to process things carefully before I render a decision, because I think the worst thing that you could do is make a hasty decision that's going to be the wrong decision. And the other part of that is that while on the surface I don't appear to be affected by what's going on around me, when you do the Myers-Briggs thing, I equally thinking and feeling. You got a little taste of that today when I was talking about my foster daughter. What happens is that I've learned to compensate, by using that thinking side at work and using the feeling side more in other settings. And I've learned to control the feeling side. It helps me because it gives me empathy and feeling for how other people might be affected by the decisions that I make. Yeah. But it also could be a detriment to making good decisions.
Yeah, and this whole thinking and feeling, we talk about this all the time, is it's okay to feel. We're all human beings, so we need to feel things. But there is a point in which you say, I need to actually think this through before I make a decision, and not make a decision maybe just purely off of feeling, which I think you would agree, this takes time. This isn't like all of a sudden I've decided I'm going to start thinking about things and not be so reactionary.
Sure, and it also you also have to have a safe space to be able to feel and to process your feelings about things, and especially when you're in a leadership role like mine, where you're looked upon to lead a system, for example, and you may be the person who is struggling just as much as the next person or the agencies that we lead. But it's not really safe for me to put those doubts and fears out there. So you have to have somebody that you can talk to who's safe and who can allow you to put those things into words and work through them sometimes. And I think that's where mentoring comes in. It's important to have somebody who is safe that you can talk to and sort of get a reaction to things and maybe just check to make sure that is what I'm feeling appropriate, or is it am I biased in some fashion?
Yeah, and if you mind answering, where is your safe space? without, you don't have to give too many details, but where have you found your safe space to be?
Well, throughout my career, I've not really had a real good mentor. And so when I arrived in this job, it was a couple of years before I was able to really develop a relationship with other leaders in similar roles. And part of that has to do with, first, you have to have trust in that person, that you put yourself in a vulnerable place when you are talking about your feelings and insecurities about certain things. And so you have to have a relationship. And I've been able to develop that relationship with, the other levy-funded agency directors. I have a really good relationship with John Trunk from the DD board, and another good relationship with Julie Barnes from Children's Services. And so oftentimes we can have lunch and talk a little bit about some of the things that make us a little bit squeamish and get a little bit of mutual support.
Yeah, and would you say that when you start to meet with those other leaders, would you say how does that help overall when you finally get into that safe space and you're sharing on that level? What are some of the things that really do help out within that, other than just maybe venting, which I think is always good to just kind of talk through, like, this is what's going on, and I need to verbally just discuss this. But what are all the goodies that you get when you're within that situation, that safe space?
Well, I would imagine that every person has some level of insecurity, and that often wonder if they're the only ones that are struggling. and so I think, when you can make yourself vulnerable to other people in a safe space, and they can make themselves just as vulnerable, you get some validation that, oh, I'm not any different than anybody else. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with me or my leadership style. Everybody goes through those kinds of things. And I think that for the first several years that I was in this role, there was such a huge learning curve for me. I didn't even know what I didn't know initially. And so learning what I didn't know so that I knew what work I had to do was a daunting task. And I wasn't sure if I had it in me to grasp these concepts that seemed to be so foreign to me. And it took a long time, and I don't know when I turned the corner on that.
Okay. And so, I'm guessing when you're talking about then with this safe space, is that being able to, in your insecurities, being able to talk to somebody else about that, and for them to give you support in a way that's an encouraging support within that grouping. Now, how did you find that safe space? Because I think, I feel like I just fell into John being one of my mentors, and but I know that a lot of people are out there looking for, how do I find somebody who can be a mentor for me? How did you get to that point?
It's about interaction with people and finding a connection. And certainly you don't start off, with, pouring your heart out and all your vulnerabilities, but you do kind of peel back a little bit of a corner, see how that's dealt with. And soon when you're in a safe space with somebody, and that you can, and to the extent to which you can make yourself vulnerable.
Okay. Yeah, I think about that a lot, and how blessed I am to be able to have some people in my life that are good mentors for me. And so, I think about it. I have students at school and just different people I meet, and we talk about that quite a bit. So I think it's really good to hear you talk about having a safe space to talk to people, because I know myself, and it'd be a lot easier for me to just kind of stuff it inside and leave it there. And then my reactions later to other situations aren't going to go well because I've only stuffed this down in. And so,
that would be a lonely place.
It would be a very lonely place. And now, you have worked within the mental health field for a long time now. And so, what would you say as far as leadership within that field? And this whole podcast that we've been talking about is all based off of psychology and systems and family systems and lowering anxiety within those systems. And so within the mental health field, where have you seen on the leadership scale, what could you tell us about that end?
Well, I'm going to go back further than that because
All
we
right.
talked about systems and we talked about families and that sort of thing. And you and I have some things in common. We both have siblings that had developmental disabilities, and I have a younger brother who was involved in the developmental disability system for years and years. And I can remember my parents considering institutionalization. I can remember walking through the hallways of an institution as they considered that as an option because they didn't know what else to do. They were sort of processing all the advice that they got from other people. And, having rejected that as an option and then making sure that they advocated for the types of services that my brother needed, I watched my family deal with a system similar to the one I'm running now and feeling as though they didn't have a voice and forcing the issue. And so there's this example that I have of advocacy from my parents' perspective, but also looking at it through the lens of my parents that really has gone a long way in informing me about what's important is making sure that we have a system in place here that is user friendly to the people who touch it, and to make sure that that we give a voice to families. And there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance there because I'm a bureaucrat, I'm an administrator, it's on one hand, and I'm a family member and somebody that carries this very deep value.
Yeah.
And sometimes my actions don't necessarily coincide with my values. And so I always kind of circle back around to that and try to convict myself to follow through on those core values that have been part of my upbringing.
Yeah, most definitely. And well, I didn't even know that about you, so it's really kind of peeled back a lot for me. And I'm thinking through, my sister and things through that. And I know Brooke has had a major impact on my life, and I'm sure your brother has, correct? And
right.
Within your family system. And so, could you maybe talk about that a little bit, about how that kind of changed, and you've become this person who's been willing to be an advocate, and I mean this is your core. This is, as you've said, one of your core values to say this is what I believe in. And so, how has your brother kind of shaped that value for you?
We have to give a voice to people who don't have a voice. We have most of the time. People who touch our system are touching our system at the worst time of their lives. People in crisis, people who are struggling with addiction, people who are in despair because of a mental illness and oftentimes the most difficult part about mental illness is that it manifests itself later in life, early adulthood typically. So somebody might be on a normal trajectory and suddenly take a turn. And so that's qualitatively different than what I grew up with my brother, who I knew would likely be disabled for the rest of his life. So that creates some additional challenges. But, so I have the opportunity and the task of helping families come to terms with that and help lead them to help that will be helpful in a helpful way. Like I said before, I have this memory of walking through an institution and thinking my parents are going to put my brother in an institution. I'm 8 years old,
Yeah.
I don't understand all of this, but it's part of what rings in my mind as we develop programs and services, and as I talk to families. And it's important to me to interact with people to understand what it feels like from their side touching the system that we manage, because if I don't understand their perspective, if I only pay attention to what the agencies tell me, I'm only going to hear what I want to hear. And when I hear and talk to families, I get feedback that's helpful to me, because that's really the core of what we're here to do.
Yeah, and there's no way that you would get to unless you start denying yourself, which you won't do. There's no way you're going to get to a point to where you're not going to be able to have relationships with people and interact with people and know their background, because it's so. Just talking to you here, it's so ingrained in who you are as a person.
Sure.
Sure. And we talk a lot about in leadership is about. And there are books about it. There's a lot of people talk about it. Is finding your why as a person, really helps you figure out what kind of leader you're going to be. And so I was blessed early on in my life to find that why, and a lot of it was because of Brooke and the way that she shaped my life, and as well as my parents. And so those steps are lifelong steps, though, and trying to figure that out. As you
Sure,
go along.
and you look at from where you sit in life, you can look back and you see things differently, and they affect you differently, and the decisions you make differently. So it's a whole different experience that you have. It's the same experience, but your perspective on it is changed.
Yeah, most definitely. Really good stuff. I feel like it would be, and I know there's probably going to be some overlap here, but I feel like it almost be like remiss for me to not ask you about the heroin epidemic that's going on around here and what needs to be done on that end as far as leadership. And so I've seen some things you've done on Facebook and things with different local churches. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit since it's such a big thing right now. What types of leadership things that you see right now that would be really helpful in that situation?
The opiate epidemic is something the likes of which I've never seen in my career. The way it's ravaged our young people in the community, the impact that it's had on families, and certainly a long-lasting impact on families. And it's not just the person that's affected; it's everybody connected to that person. So, our job is just so important. It's important for us to make sure that we are doing everything in our power. Yet there's no magic bullet. So there's not one intervention that's going to help. And so this is sort of like a pile of crap dumped at my doorstep, and what am I going to do with this? And I've got a shovel and I could get to work on that pile of stuff on my doorstep, but I can't do it by myself.
Yeah.
And by me, I'm saying the ADM system. And so it was really important for us to make sure that we acknowledge the sheer magnitude of this whole thing and try to engage other people. And that's part of the reason why we formed the Opiate Task Force in 2014. We wanted to make sure that we engaged as many people who could be part of that solution as possible. And then there was the nightmare of July of 2016 when we saw this huge spike in overdoses because we had this carfentanil that came into our community, that this elephant tranquilizer that created such havoc and death and just ravaged our community. And it was then that I started to make an even more intentional effort to reach out to the community, to talk to people who touched our system, who I needed to understand from their perspective what it was like. And that's where, I decided that I'd open up my social media a little bit further and start to connect with people. And people who are critical of our system wanted to understand why they felt that way and what kinds of changes could we make as a result of that. And I've always felt to be a good leader, you have to be open to criticism, and you have to be able to use that criticism in a very constructive fashion. And so communication is important. But communication works both ways. You have to listen just as much as you talk. So I spent a lot of time listening, and as a result of that, I think we had some key principles that I began to understand in a way that I hadn't appreciated before. Yeah. The sheer lethality of the opiate epidemic was that people were dying every day, and there were short windows of time when people were maybe ready for treatment, and that window closed very quickly.
Wow.
And so if our system wasn't prepared to accept them when they were ready for treatment, we lost an opportunity, and potentially we lost a life. And that weighed very heavily on me. And so we have done everything in our power, and my team is just wonderful because this isn't work that I'm doing. This is work that I'm directing, and they have done a wonderful job of helping us to put together a system that has improved access, markedly. That's involved a little bit of money, but it's involved a heck of a lot of collaboration and coordination. And in understanding the system, how it should work, and then seeing our system through the lens of the people who use it. I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, the connections. I mean, before we even started talking today, you were talking about how you moved from several different buildings and decided to move within this building with Summit County Health, and just trying to get that connection started right from the beginning, and how it's a relationship that's going to take time to build, but it's a relationship that is worthy to put together, because it's only going to be more helpful to not only to yourself, but to the other people that are around you. And man, leadership is a lot about connecting with other people. But recognizing that you need to connect with other people is where it starts out too.
And using the tools that are at your disposal. So, I think that oftentimes having a social media presence means that working at very unconventional times, and am an ambassador for our system in a lot of ways with people. But I think it's served us well. I think it's allowed us to connect with people who can help us. One of the things that we talk about in our system is that we're all working together on this issue. And, what you bring to the table as a person with lived experience with an addiction is just as important as what we bring in our treatment agencies. And saying that there's a role for everybody, and no one's role is more important than the other.
Yeah.
But together we create a system of service to the community.
Because while you do that, you're giving everybody ownership. Everybody now has ownership over what you're doing, and so everybody has a stake, and so it's all costing them the same, and they'll get the benefits the same. And that is one of the hardest things to do as a leader, is to try to get everybody else to have some ownership over what's going on, because it takes a long time.
Well, I kind of used an analogy, and my father used to say it's like having a squirrel by the tail, but for me, it's more about keeping all the squirrels in the yard, and sometimes everybody has an agenda, everybody has a need, and we have to acknowledge all of those, but at the same time, there has to be some basic principles that guide us. And I can remember a conversation with advocates, with politicians, with community leaders who came together right after this horrible incident last July when so many people lost their lives. And we said, we will stand shoulder to shoulder and we'll deal with that. And we circle back to that statement over and over again when we have disagreements, when we don't think that our system is working at its optimal level. We say, let's work together. Let's try not to disparage one another. Let's try to prop each other up.
It's excellent. I love it. I've been very encouraged by talking to you, and we are coming up against it. But I really do appreciate you opening up, and it really, as I sit here and listen to you, I think, man, no wonder this guy's in this position. I can see the qualities that you're just talking about and the way that you're talking about them, and it makes a lot of sense of why you're in the position you're at. And so it sounds like you're really, really passionate about it, and that's the kind of person who should be in this position. And and I think you would also agree that as a leader, those are the type of people. What you want to do is you want to find people who you can find their passions and put them in the same places. And so,
I think most importantly, I think it's finding people who really care, who genuinely care, aren't in leadership positions because of their own need to be out in front, but it's really about caring for the work that you do and the purpose of that work.
Yeah, and the purpose. Yeah, I mean, your purpose outflows into whatever you do, and so it makes a lot of sense of where you're at. And once again, I am super thankful for that you were able to talk to me. Really encouraging to me to just hear about your thoughts and where things should go, and the way that you've been able to make connections with different people, and the way that things should be done. And when we talk about stuff on our leadership podcast, you were like A+. This is
Thank you.
not to put a grade on it, but you're the type of person I want to talk to more and more, because you have just a wealth of knowledge that I can glean from a standpoint of understanding more about leadership. And I think you would even say yourself, I am not done learning from those things, and I still make my mistakes, but that's part of it.
Yeah, life is all about improving yourself. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jerry, for talking to me today.
Well, I appreciate you reaching out to me.
Yeah, and if anybody else wants to contact us, once again, our email is theofpodcast@gmail.com. We're on iTunes, Google Play, Simplecast. You can watch our faces on YouTube if you like. But yeah, we'll see you next time. Thanks.